What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today I want to talk about a card that if you have played on Arena at all in the last, well, since it released back in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, if you've been playing Arena at all since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty dropped, you have seen this card, and it is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Now, this is a very fascinating saga, and that's why I wanted to devote a whole video to it. This is an auto-include in any deck running red right now, but it's very interesting in that all of its modes, or everything it gives you, seems very unassuming. It doesn't look like a bomb on its face, but it absolutely is. And we're going to talk about why that is today. So if you're not familiar with Fable of the Mirror Breaker, it is a saga for 2 and a red. On its first chapter, you create a 2/2 red goblin shaman creature token with whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. Chapter 2, you may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. And then Chapter 3, exile this saga, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And what it transforms into is the Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, which is a 2/2 goblin shaman, note, not legendary, that has the ability pay 1 tap, create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So Kiki-Jiki is obviously a very, very good card, and so anything that is reminiscent of Kiki-Jiki, even in a powered down fashion like this, is capable of producing some pretty busted stuff. So that's the part of this card that where you look at and go, okay, that could be great. But the original Kiki-Jiki is a 5-drop 2/2 with this ability, except you don't have to pay 1 into it. You just tap it to create the copy. And it also has haste. So the moment Kiki-Jiki hits the field, you can just tap away and go crazy. And when you combine that alongside cards like Deceiver Exarch that untaps a creature when it enters the battlefield, you create infinite Deceiver Exarchs. They all have haste. That is that's kind of the nature of the Splinter Twin deck in Modern. That's the combo that leverages it. So by adding 1 mana to that ability, you disable that mode, or you make that combo ineffective because you have to pay 1 for every copy. So it no longer creates an infinite army, just a pretty darn big one. Now that said, that big one might still be enough to win you the game, but you have to spend 1 mana every time you want to activate it. In any event, that's a little bit of a tangent. So that is pretty powerful. And you can imagine when you have Reflection of Kiki-Jiki down, taking advantage of a creature with a strong enter the battlefield trigger, like say a Titan of Industry, or in older formats, an Agent of Treachery, those can get out of hand really, really fast. You get to untap once with the Reflection of Kiki-Jiki with one of those creatures on the battlefield, your opponent's going to be crying. And so obviously that's good. There's no question that's great. However, in order to execute that, you have to pay 3 for a saga and then wait 3 turns, and then when it transforms, the Reflection can't activate immediately, and your opponent knows it's coming, so they can hold up removal for it. It's also only a 2/2, so in various combat scenarios, this thing dies immediately. It can very easily die to things like Meathook Massacre, Languish rather. Those style of board sweepers, this thing just gets swept up, no problem. It's very easy to deal with, but if you don't deal with it, it's going to cause problems. And that's good, but that's actually not what makes this card so fantastic, believe it or not. Yes, that upside is awesome, and the card has that upside, which is great. But what really makes Fable of the Mirror Breaker so impressive is card economy. That's really the name of the game. So for the first mode, if that's all you get, you pay 3 mana and you get a 2/2 red goblin shaman creature token, and when it attacks, you create a treasure token. So it's a 2/2 in a relevant creature type. If you have goblin synergies, you want to take advantage of that. And it's a shaman, which can be relevant for certain old school decks as well. That all of a sudden, you now have this 2/2. When it attacks, it creates a treasure token. If your opponent doesn't have any blockers, you can do that multiple times. If they do have blockers, you probably are going to lose your 2/2, but you get the treasure token, and all of a sudden, on turn 4, you have 5 mana to work with. That's a big deal. Like, that's a shockingly big deal. And so it puts your opponent in the position of having to answer this 2/2 red goblin shaman right away. But here's the thing. If they do answer it, if they have an Infernal Grasp or a Shock or something that can take care of this little goblin, there's still the rest of the saga sitting on the board, and you're going to get all of those other modes still. So as a result, you're forcing your opponent to spend 1 card to deal with just the first chapter, and you've got 2 more chapters to go. So you spend a card, And they have to spend a card to answer 1/3 of the value that you are going to get off of this. That's fantastic. Fable the Mirror Breaker is effectively 3 cards stapled onto 1. And if you don't believe me, let me explain a little bit further. So we've already talked about the Goblin Shaman already being worth a card. I mean, if there was a common in a set that was a 2/2 for 2 and a red, Goblin Shaman, when it attacks, create a treasure token. I mean, that is a tiny discounted Goldspan Dragon. And I say common specifically because that feels like a draft card, because usually you wouldn't want to spend an entire card on just a 2/2 that can't even attack right away that has this cool attack trigger, because it's probably going to die the turn it attacks because you're going to be attacking with it on turn 4. Your opponent's probably going to have a defense set up of some kind, but you get the treasure token. So if the treasure token is worth it for you, then it still might be valuable. The reason that, so if you were to spend 2 and a red to produce a Goblin Shaman, but you had to spend 1 card to get that, you just play a creature out, for example, you would be much more hesitant to attack with it because that card is much more precious to you than a token that the Fable generates. But because it's a token, you can get rid of it for that treasure token. And so all of a sudden, I mean, chapter 1 might as well just say create a treasure token. That's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And then you get chapter 2. And I believe chapter 2 is worth an entire card's worth of value. You may discard up to 2 cards if you do draw that many cards. We've all seen the situation where you got 5 lands in hand and you're thinking, how am I going to work with this? Fable the Mirror Breaker solves that problem. We've also been in situations where we have a tenacious underdog in hand and we just need to attack with it next turn, so we were going to blitz with it anyway. Well, we can blitz it out of the graveyard, so we might as well just chuck it and draw some fresh cards. You also have your Reanimator decks that want things in the graveyard. And so this allows you to fill your graveyard and it replaces the cards in your hand. And again, most importantly, you don't have to spend a full card to get this effect. Meanwhile, there are cards that give you this exact same effect for 1 card. Look at Cathartic Reunion or Cathartic Pyre. Both of those cards are very similar to this effect, except they are their own cards. It's just you spend a card, you get the effect. In the case of Cathartic Reunion, it's kind of interesting because you discard 2 cards, but draw 3 cards. And in this case, you're discarding up to 2 cards and you're drawing up to 2 cards. So it's a little bit different in that regard. However, with Cathartic Reunion, you have to spend a card. So it replaces itself. Whereas Fable the Mirror Breaker gives you all kinds of other value instead of replacing that card. But I think that comparison is a fair one. I think those 2 cards are... the second mode of Fable the Mirror Breaker and Cathartic Reunion actually feel pretty darn similar. And there are plenty of decks that have no trouble running Cathartic Reunion. Because if you're getting value out of your graveyard, like if a creature or a particular card going into your graveyard is giving you value, that discard is not you going down on cards. You're getting advantage by drawing additional cards and being presented with additional options while putting a card where you want it anyway. If I'm playing a Reanimator deck, I want my Coma or my Velomachus in the graveyard. I don't want it in my hand. And this gives you that. And you get to draw fresh cards. So you're more likely to draw into your Reanimator spells or more removal that you're going to need to deal with the board. It's all good. Like that second mode is very unassuming. Like I said about all the modes on this card, none of them look flashy or sexy with the possible exception of that last one. But they're all good. It's all great value. And to be honest, if all you got was modes 1 and 2, this card would still be good. It would still be playable. That's all you need. But we also get this top end mode of the Reflection of Kiki Jiki, which is absolutely insane, like I mentioned. And so picture this. You play out Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Your opponent is on, say, I don't know, Dimir Control, and they don't have a counter spell, so it resolves. They then have to spend a removal spell on your first token. You get the second mode regardless, unless they have a way to destroy Fable of the Mirror Breaker, in which case you've got them to spend 2 pieces of removal already, and then you don't get your value, but that's fine. If you do get the value on the second one, Reflection of Kiki Jiki flips, and they have to spend more removal on it. That's a clean 2-for-1 on 1 card. It's beautiful. So what you're doing is you're spending very few cards and you're getting multiple cards worth of value on a single card. That's card advantage. There are certain ways to create card advantage, and that's one way to do so, getting multiple cards worth of value. Now, there are other cards in Standard that we will be talking about on this channel that I'm sure are going to get their own episodes that create card advantage in different ways. Being able to kill multiple creatures with one go, like board wipes are a great example of this. Those create card advantage by killing off 4 or 5 of your opponent's creatures for 1 card. You know, that is a great way to establish card advantage. Other ways to establish card advantage: spend 1 card and draw multiple cards. Even something as simple as a divination can create card advantage. But I think Fable the Mirror Breaker, that's really where it shines. The amount of card advantage it gives you. And that is why, if you're playing on Arena or even in older formats, this card is everywhere. Because for 3 mana, you just get so much. I mean, if they were to rebalance this card for Alchemy, they'd have to make it at least cost 4. I think 2 red would be a reasonable price for this. It would become far less popular, because that's one of the reasons it's so successful, is because it's just so cheap, it's so efficient, and you just get so much. So if I haven't sold you on this card already, I don't know what else I can say. If there are other cards that are available in our current standard environment or even in older formats that you want to see me kind of give this treatment to, do a deep dive, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please let me know what you'd like to see, and we're going to do more card profiles like this. I genuinely just enjoy talking about Magic cards, so we're going to do it a lot. It's what we do. But yeah, so this has been the Fable of the Mirror Breaker. I think this card is awesome. I think it absolutely deserves the amount of play that it sees right now, and its price tag, if you buy it on the secondary market, it's a very powerful card. I think it's a very powerful card, and it gives you something you want at every stage, no matter what type of deck it's in. And that's why it's just absolutely everywhere. If you're running red and you don't have this in your deck, I would highly recommend you consider taking a look at it. Even if you're playing an aggro strategy, you'd be surprised. It might be valuable. It might do the job. Even though it's not adding power to the board immediately, but you're still getting that Goblin Shaman, which you might be able to leverage. In any event, thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate you. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. It makes a huge difference. I am approaching the 1,000 subscriber mark, which is a big deal for any growing YouTube channel. So if you wouldn't mind helping me out getting there, it would make it would warm my heart oh so much. So thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I'll catch you on the next one.